something that's pretty common in Azure these days in a lot of organizations is hosting SQL databases in the Azure Cloud Services. Now, one of the main benefits of this is the fact that I don't have to host my own server on premise and all the headaches involved there, or you can also look at it from the standpoint of even hosting a virtual machine and installing SQL on that virtual machine, and all the management that you got to deal with there is also a headache. With Azure SQL databases, this is a platform as a service, so we're not having to deal with the underlying hardware. We're also not having to deal with the underlying operating system. All right, so I want to look now at creating a SQL database and server and how we can connect to that service itself. All right, so here we are on portal.azure.com. We can click the menu button, and if you should see SQL databases here, but if you don't, you can always go to all services and then just do a search for SQL, and you'll see SQL database there. All right, and then from there I'm going to click to create the database. All right, and just a forewarning, this is yet another service that is constantly changing. It doesn't matter how often I update my videos, they're constantly changing these screens week after week after week. So don't be surprised if things look a little different for you, but the concept should be the same. All right, so here we are, subscription. One is my subscription. I'm going to choose a resource group. I'm going to create a resource group called SQL Demo RG. All right, that'll be my resource group, and then I'm going to give the database a name. I'm going to call this ELP database for exam lab practice database. All right, and from there it's going to ask me if I have a server. I do not have a server, so I'll need to create a server. Okay, so we'll click to create. All right, give the server a name. I'm going to call this ELP SQL Server. All right, and it gives it this DNS name that'll be associated with it by default. This will be East US. Okay, so then it's going to ask me about the authentication system. How do I want to do authentication? Do I want to do Azure Active Directory authentication? I want to do SQL, or do I want to do SQL and Azure Active Directory? Okay, for now, we're just going to choose SQL, and we're going to basically manage our user through SQL. All right. And so my admin logon name will be ELP admin, and I'm going to put a password in here for the SQL database. All right, and I think I typoed it. Let me try that again. There we go. All right, and now we're going to go ahead and click OK. So it's going to be setting up this SQL server for us. Okay, and not really getting into too many details here this is not really focused on SQL, but they do have what's called an elastic pool. Provides a effective solution for getting multiple databases, and all of that saves money. But if you are going to deal with multiple databases, and asking if this is a production environment, development environment, okay, there are some costs there you can look at if you go to the Azure calculator. But so we're just going to go with production by default, and then you got the general purpose, the standard series for computing cost, 2 virtual CPUs, 32 gig storage, zone redundant disabled, all of that. And if you want to do the backup of redundancy, I'm going to do just a local redundant backup storage. All right. Again, not getting in all the details of that. That's not the point in this video. All right. And then if I want to configure some networking for this, I could. All right. Networking, connectivity, networking policy. I could allow no access, public endpoint if I want, private endpoint. I am going to go with a public endpoint, and it says allow Azure services and resource access to the server, add current IP address. So I can say yes and yes. All right, this is going to allow my client IP that I'm using right now to get access to the database. Of course, you can also add additional IPs if you want. Okay, and then connectivity policy, default, use redirect policy for all client connections originating inside of Azure, and proxy for all client connections originating outside. Or you can do a proxy. All connections are proxied via the Azure Database Gateway, or you can redirect clients' established connections directly to the node hosting the database. All right. So I'm just going to leave it as a default. and then we'll use TLS 1.2 encryption, so that's all fine. Any additional security here? I'm not going to turn on the Defender for SQL right now because that does cost a little extra money. Don't really need it. All right. It asks me if I want to do ledger cryptographically verifies the integrity of your data and detects any tampering that might have occurred. If I want to configure that, I can. If I want to configure a delegated identity, a managed delegated identity here, I could, which I'm not going to right now. Not getting into managed identities in this video. Additional settings. Now, one thing I do want to do is I want to add the sample. They allow you to add some sample data just to kind of look at in the database. So I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to click Review and Create. All right. And again, monthly cost is $227. You can go with a lower. You can go with a lower tier, just for playing around. I mean, this is fine, but you can go with a lower tier of performance if you want. If you want to try to lower the monthly costs, you know, Microsoft does give you that capability. In fact, if you're using a free trial, sometimes you'll have to go with a lower. Like if I just go with basic, as you can see, it's just like $5 a month roughly. But I'll go ahead and apply that. And then we'll click Review and Create. All right. And that was just on our size. Let me make sure. Yeah, that's just on our compute and storage. Our server and all that still costs money. The services and all that still cost money. So we'll go Review and Create. All right, and we're going to go ahead and click to create. And I'm going to pause this recording while the creation is happening. Okay, once that is done, we can go to the resource, and that brings us into the database itself right here. All right, and if you go to your resource group, if I go to the menu button and click on resource groups, I can see the SQL Demo RG resource group, and I can see the resources itself, which is the database, and then there is the server. Okay, so we got our database, we got our server. Okay, now the next thing is, if I want to connect to the database, I need something that's going to let me communicate with the database, and Microsoft has a free piece of software that you can download for working with your database, known as the SSMS. And if you actually go to just pull up Google or Bing and then just do a quick Google search for SSMS, you can see it right here. Download the SQL Server Management Studio. We'll click on that. Free download of this, and it's now downloading the SQL Server Management Studio. So just let that get downloaded, and then all you got to do is just go through the installation process. So we'll let that go ahead and get downloaded, and this piece of software is going to allow me to connect in. I'm going to be able to run SQL queries and all that against the Azure server that we've configured. Okay, so that's the goal here, is to be able to make that connection and make changes. So I'm going to go ahead and open this up. Going to choose Install. The install takes usually about 10 minutes, and you may or may not be asked to reboot your computer when you install this, so just a heads up on that. Now I'm going to hit Close. I'm going to hit Start here on my Windows computer. I'm just going to do a search for the word Studio, and then from there I'm going to find Microsoft's SQL Server Management Studio 18 in this case. I'm going to go ahead and click on that, and it's now loading up the SQL Server Management Studio. Now, while I wait on that, I'm also going to jump over back into Azure here and look at our server, and you can see our SQL Server name right here. Okay, so that is our SQL Server name. And I'm just going to copy that to clipboard. All right, and I'll have that when the studio is up and running, and I'm going to be using that to log on with. All right, so once the Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio is loaded, I'm going to go up here and paste in my authentication server under Database Engine here, and we're going to change the authentication to SQL Server Authentication. We're going to put in our credentials, which was ELP admin. And I'm going to go ahead and put my logon credentials in there, and we're going to go ahead and connect. And it is now authenticating us to the Microsoft server, and we are officially connected to the server, and there is our database. All right, we already should have some tables and all that because it did add some sample information into the database. All right, so this is how you can quickly set up a SQL database and SQL Server and then get connected into it. And hopefully that gives you a nice little tutorial as far as just getting all that set up and connecting. I hope you're enjoying the content so far. I wanted you to know that I'm trying really hard to build this channel, and it would help me out so much if you would take the time to like and subscribe to the channel. Alright, and with that said, let's get back to the video.